Thanks for joining us for a special edition of Behind the Story covering the California wildfires. I'm April Warnicki here with Tess Rafols and Jared Dillingham. Both just got back from Southern California covering the destructive and deadly wildfires for Arizona's family. Thousands of firefighters have been battling those wildfires across 45 square miles of densely populated Los Angeles County. We've got the two largest wildfires, the Palisades Fire, the Eaton Fire. Together, they've devastated entire communities and neighborhoods since they sparked back in early January on the 7th, and they're still burning today. At least 27 people have been killed. That destruction just so widespread. I know you both have seen that in person. The rebuilding going to take years. More than 12,000 structures damaged or burned to ash. Tess and Jared were there on the ground experiencing all of that loss, all of that grief firsthand. Every home lost is a story. And of course, we simply don't have the time in our newscast. So we wanted to come together here today to tell some of those stories, the ones that maybe we didn't have the time to share with our viewers over the air. So Tess and Jared, you both were sent, but about a week apart to Southern California. So Jared, I want to start with you. When you were there, the homes were still burning. In some cases, during your live shots, right there behind you. Can you talk a little bit about the different access that you were allowed compared to what you would usually get covering fires here in Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, we pulled up to the scene and my concern was, well, I don't really know where to go. I don't know how to find this fire zone. And the sad thing is, you couldn't miss it because you pulled into Altadena and it was everywhere. Both sides of the main streets, neighborhoods here, neighborhoods there, like you couldn't miss it. And you could see the flames still at that point. The fires were still burning, the gas lines were still spewing natural gas, which was on fire at every home and every cul-de-sac, so you really couldn't miss it. I mean, we had, unfortunately, an overly easy time finding the destruction, the sheer destruction. I think a problem that I had, and I kept saying this to our producers, is I don't know how to convey the scope of this damage, because when you're standing there, I can turn around in a 360-degree movement and see it every street, and you could see this block, but then you could see through the trees to the block behind that, the block behind that. And on TV, I just couldn't convey the extent of the damage done. That was a frustration I had right off the bat. So we kind of just set to work trying to show individual businesses and homes story by story. And I've covered wildfires in every state across the West, from Montana, Washington, down through Arizona for many years. I've never had this kind of access, and I've heard that California grants unlimited access, but that was new to me as a reporter, because here, even when we go to a wildfire, you know, say the Wallow Fire, which was one of the biggest in our state's history a decade ago, you're kept a mile away from it, and it's strictly regulated, and maybe one day they will escort a group in, if it's safe enough to get sort of close to get some photos and videos of what's going on. This, I knew it would be the case, but just experiencing that unlimited access and how close we could get to the flames and the embers flying up in the air that first night, it was something I didn't expect, and I didn't really know how to handle that from a safety perspective at first, but we were surrounded by firefighters, and they were helping us, guiding us, which was very much appreciated because it felt like we were in a safe space to kind of convey to people back home what was happening live in front of our eyes in California.
And you know, you described that being that close with your access to a wildfire, but in one of your live shots on Good Morning Arizona, you were in front of a house fire. You also aren't allowed that kind of access typically on a house fire either.
You're kept blocks away, you know, just for safety reasons. But the first night we pulled up even, and I was telling you guys a country club was on fire, and it was a shocking sight to see this huge old building up in flames, but the embers were flying. It's when the winds were still strong. Embers were flying. They were like landing in our hair. We had helmets on for safety, but I was like, you know, we got to move. So we moved down the street from there where another house was on fire, and that was part of the problem right off the bat. The winds were carrying embers from house to house to house, and during the morning show, that house lit. And that was one of two homes that had been saved from the initial fire. The homes all around it burned. Two of them had been saved. It must have been an ember that got into the roof, or maybe something like one of the roots in the backyard was still smoldering underground, and a gust came along and whipped up a fire, and that's what we watched burn over the course of 45 minutes live on TV the following morning. So it kept happening.
You mentioned wearing the helmets because of the embers flying and the wind. How did you both deal with that air quality?
Well, I think we talk about how we came at different times. I went the first, after 5-6 days of the fire going on. I definitely had to wear a mask in the areas that were burned out. A little further into the city, like say downtown LA, because we were there covering the people in Arizona making a difference. Some of our travels took us to downtown LA, a good 20-30 miles. The air quality didn't seem as bad. There weren't a lot of people wearing masks, but anytime you were near the burned out areas, you definitely could smell, obviously, because so much had burned. There was so much destruction that you could definitely smell it. And I know for me and my photographer, Shane, who we were there with for 4 days, by day 2, I think we were both coughing up, and we were wearing a mask. You had to wear a mask. I mean, not like you were wearing a mask too, and yours was in a much
But we should have been wearing masks the whole time, looking back on it and the way I felt afterwards, because now we're hearing all the firefighters and the fire officials talk about the toxins in the air. Everything in your house burns, the metal's burned and your batteries burn and everything burns, and it all just kind of like floats up into the air. And we were walking through that. But, when you're there, you don't really see how smoky it is until after night falls and you shine a light through the air and you see everything that's wafting around you. You're like, oh man, I've been breathing this for a day. I better put my mask on. So the air quality was horrible. A couple times like an ocean breeze would come in, maybe when we were closer to the Palisades fire in Malibu, and that breath of fresh air would be a huge relief.
Yeah, very different from 6 days later when we were not near the fire. There was nothing on fire around us anymore, but it was the damage left behind.
And I know media was not allowed inside the shelters, but you were able to talk to many of the evacuees outside of the shelters, probably some that didn't want to go on camera, but still told you their story off camera.
A lot of people didn't want to, which is completely understandable, right? You're going through this horrific tragedy, many of these places wearing the clothes that they had escaped with, and still just trying to figure out and try to absorb this traumatic event, so very understandable that they didn't want to be on camera. But everywhere you turn, there were people affected by the fire, right? Whether you were an evacuee and your home was in the zone, or you were a victim who lost your home, there were so many people. And like you said, every house has a story, every business has a story, every burnt out car, just story after story of heartache. And, for many people, just, I can't believe it's happened, right? We always knew there was a threat, especially for the folks in Palisades. A lot of them were saying, we are evacuated normally maybe twice a year at least. This happens because we live in the hills. They're very adamant about giving us warnings and letting us know, but this was obviously different. And some people said, we thought we were just going to go back. We thought it was another regular evacuation, until they realized how close the smoke and the flames were.
I mean, how are they even coping with that? Because it's not a house or two that's gone. It's neighborhoods wiped clean. It's no schools. It's no store. I mean, their community is gone. From the evacuees you talk to, how do you think they're coping with that?
I think they just don't know what to do. A lot of them are just, still in shock. And what are the next steps? By the time we got there, they had set up something, and we showed you on air, the disaster relief centers. And this was going to help them, all the information under one roof, from talking to FEMA, from, I don't have my medications, I didn't get to run out with them, but I need them. From the health department, LA County put together several of these locations to help people. So that, I think, was a great resource for folks. But even some of the evacuation centers, when we went to some of them and talked to people, they didn't even know this was there, because I think just dealing with the shock, it's not absorbing all the information that's out there. And I'm like, go to this place, go to this place. There is help out there. They're going to get you guys what you need.
Jared, you've mentioned a little bit feeling a sense of guilt. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I think that sometimes in our jobs, when we cover a tragedy or cover a challenge that somebody's facing, we try to end the story with, some hope or a solution. All the on your side stuff we do, the goal is to have a solution at the end of those stories to help somebody out. There's nothing we can do, And I mean, people, when we got there, this is the house we were talking about that burned on Good Morning Arizona, just in front of our eyes that morning. And when we first got there, people were just in shock and gathered in parking lots at restaurants and shopping plazas, just looking at the smoke in their neighborhood from a mile away. And I was astounded by the number of people who wanted to come over and talk to us and tell us what they'd left behind. Many of them had their dogs, but cats get scared. Cats are different, so cats are hard to find in an emergency. So a lot of them were just at that point nervous about where their cats were, hoping their cats had made it, and eager to come talk to us. I couldn't believe how many people walked over to us once they saw we had a camera. And a number of people from Phoenix who've moved there. You know how people move from California back and forth to Arizona. So many people from this area came over to talk to us once they saw our truck and our decals. And I was just astounded that they wanted to talk on camera about what they'd lost. Driving through one neighborhood, this one woman came up to us and told us that her dad was among the dead and pointed to the bed where they found him earlier that day. He's 82 years old, an engineer for Lockheed, bought the house in the 60s, had lived there for decades, raised the kids there and everything. And I could not believe, hours after she found that out, she approached us because she wanted to talk about him and what that house meant to them, because it's a historically black neighborhood, which I didn't know before covering this, but that was a place in the 60s where black families could move to, have a very nice home at an affordable price in an area where they don't have to deal with racism. So there's a lot of history in that neighborhood as well, which burned, and you have those families who have that tie to it and so much pride in that home ownership dating back to the 60s when it was one of very few places where they could live. And that was like a whole nother layer of this that I wasn't prepared for. And before that home burned that we were just mentioning, another family came up to us, another older black gentleman who stayed to protect his home with his son, a home that they'd lived in since the 60s, same situation. And they protected his home, and that's the story when a Phoenix fire truck came and helped him. Not Phoenix, Arizona. He couldn't remember which city because of the chaos, but it was an Arizona fire truck that came and helped him protect his home and two of his neighbors' homes that night. And it was all the same situation. They lived there together for decades and had been through so much over the decades, and then this moves in.
And that's such a generational loss. There's so many families affected, not just the family that's living there, but the family before them, hoping to pass it down to their children.
That's exactly what it was.
That's again, another layer. There's so many stories behind every victim in this, and it's just so tragic.
And I know you're from Southern California, so you brought a good perspective on a lot of that as well. I think you both did just a great job showcasing the diversity of the economic area, the economic diversity of the area, because I think sometimes in the national news you'll just see those Malibu mansions, and you're not seeing some of these neighborhoods and these generations of homes. And so can you talk a little bit about what you saw, familiar places from your childhood?
Okay. Going to be strong for
I knew it was going to be tough for you to travel out there as well, and you were anticipating that going out there, that it was going to be hard to see that.
And I wanted to go because I knew a lot of these places, right? Like, Topanga Canyon, you heard that probably in the news a lot because that's where the fire was burning along those lines. They had blocked that off. That's where the blockade was, where it was closed through the canyon. I'd driven that canyon hundreds of times
since you
growing
had your
up.
license.
Yeah, and and with your family, because we would go over from the San Fernando Valley, and it was maybe a 15-20 minute drive through the canyon to get to Malibu. Like Zuma 7 was my beach growing up, and Zuma 7 and that beach was now the firefighters' home base. 5,000 firefighters just on the Palisades fire. These are some of the photos that my photographer Shane and I took. When we first got there, we got in Monday night, so we were seeing things in dusk. It was not the same. And then when that morning came and we were broadcasting live that morning, as the sun was starting to come up, you could really see the scope. This was on top of one of the highest or tallest rows that we could take up at the top of the Palisades. So you can see it's just such a juxtaposition, the beauty of the Pacific Ocean. The sun was coming up, the sunrise, but then there was all this, just the destruction, and home after home charred, memories charred. And now what you're looking at, these are some of the places that gave people hope. These were those centers where folks could go. This was just the FEMA area. And again, this is one location. In the first day, they were only open for a few hours. And it took that long to get this going. This was a week later, keep in mind, right? This was that Tuesday after when they finally had these centers going to help people. They said within the first few hours, they had helped 150 families. Some of the photos you're looking at now, just wanted to explain what this is. So at our hotel, and everywhere you turned, people were bringing things to donate when they knew if there were any evacuees nearby. So there were rooms that had been turned into places where any evacuees could come get clothes, just the things that you don't ever think about. Like they had a stack for toiletries, obviously things for babies, toys for the kids to keep them busy. Yeah. Seeing evacuees, whole families, just trying to pass the time, trying to keep their kids, trying to make it as normal as possible when there was absolutely nothing normal about this. I was in awe of those moms, and all I could think about was like, look at them. They're still doing the hardest job in the world of being a parent and helping their kids be normal when they're trying to figure out, where are we going to stay after this week? We have a few days in a hotel. Thank goodness vouchers were being given out. Shout out to Hilton. They were giving out 1 week free. We talked about how Vrbo, Airbnb were offering homes that weren't being used too. But it's those little things that I feel like gave people hope. And for us, gave us hope in covering this.
When you talk about the kids and where are they going to go to school? That's another question they're facing now. We were at one school that burned, and if you know those neighborhoods, if you're from a neighborhood, you know how to get there, even if there's a roadblock. So two younger girls, teenagers, walked through, some trail to get to the school that had burned, that, they'd gone there for dance classes and for this class and that class and everything. They just wanted to see it with their eyes, and they were just in shock. Of course, and multiply that times how many thousands of kids who don't really have a school to go back to.
And so much uncertainty, not knowing, I'm sure, in the shelters at some point, is your house still there? Are we here for a day? Are we here for a week? Do we not have any place? Were there people who tried to give you their address to go check, since you had that kind of access?
And that's something I wish that I could have stayed longer, a day longer, because once we got there, I got number of addresses from friends and colleagues, relatives, friends of relatives, viewers started messaging me saying, this is my address, this is my aunt's address, this is where I grew up, I'd love to know if this home is still standing. And I was only able to provide answers for 2 people while I was there. Since then, they've come out with a mapping system that sort of lets people look up block by block or address by address even, and it shows you a photo of what the home currently looks like, or what, what's left of it. But yeah, I mean, that was something I wish I could have spent more time doing, just giving those answers to people who were wondering if that property was still standing. So, yeah.
Same. I mean, I had people texting me, friends of friends, and things like that.
You can't blame them, because we have access to it that they don't.
Absolutely. And there was a couple that I was able to give an inside view and, with nothing left. But yes, that mapping system that the county was doing was, a savior for a lot of people, and knowing my home is still standing, or, okay, now I know my home is gone. I need to accept this and think about what's next. Where do I go from here?
Some of the most incredible views that we were able to see of the destruction came from drones. You both have decades of experience covering wildfires across the West. Can you talk a little bit about how drones have changed the game in both positive and some very negative ways?
I mean, immediately we started seeing images, aerial images on social media and on TV, and they're stunning. They're jaw-dropping. You can't believe that this swath of a city has been wiped out and what it looks like. So in one respect, it shows the reality and it shows the destruction better than we can on the ground. On the other hand, unless it's coming from a fire department or a police department or someone who has approval to do that, they, just like they're causing problems for our firefighters in Arizona on our wildfires, they cause big problems. We reported how many times on that tanker that got hit in the wing. Busted a hole in the wing of that, knocked it out of commission for like 3 days. And then as we were leaving that day, all air support had been grounded again, because another group of, we were listening to the scanner, another group of drones were up there flying around. And they didn't know who was flying them, where they were going. So just out of safety, they had to ground the helicopters and the air tankers again. And when that happens, that takes a crucial piece of firefighting support away from those firefighters who, at that point, were just trying to make progress on these fires and prevent new fires from starting. So I think, it's LA. There are a lot of creators there. There are a lot of people who have this equipment and they want to fly it around to show people these incredible images. And boy, did that do a lot of harm in the initial days after this fire broke out.
I mean, so frustrating. The firefighters are waiting for those winds to die down to be able to get the tankers up, to be able to use their own resources, and then to be, grounded or damaged by the drones. What has stuck with you both? Is there something or someone that you keep thinking about since you've gotten home?
Yes, for me, definitely. In fact, I was just talking to my news photographer who I was with, Shane, just asking him how he's doing. And there was a family that we met. It was an evacuated family at one of the centers. It was in Westwood, which is near UCLA. That's where one of the evacuation stations were. And it was, we pull into the parking lot and there was a goat in a dog bed sitting there, and a young woman just with the goat. And, you know, so of course I was like, how are you guys doing? Why is the goat here? You know, do you not have a place for it? And she was just saying, this is the only thing that helps me find comfort and joy, is being out here, getting to sit in the sunshine for a little bit, and my goat that we were able to save because our home is gone. And so her mother was, you know, we spoke to her mother, and she was just so distraught, obviously, losing everything, losing their livelihood because their homes were their businesses as well. And so I feel like everyone we spoke to, you really are thinking about, right? Because how can you not? Even people that we didn't speak to on air, I always think about one of the firefighters who I spoke to, because he was a public information officer. And those are the people that you maybe see at a news conference or so. But I was speaking to one just off camera, getting the latest information when we were at Will Rogers State Beach. That's in the Palisades.
That's the one with the big parking lot right outside of Santa Monica?
Yes, exactly. And I said, how are you holding up? And he's like, I'm not used to doing this. I'm always on the fire lines. And I was like, wow. And he's like, but you're coming from wherever. I think he was coming from up north. It's wherever you're placed, and everybody was needed, you know, with thousands and thousands of firefighters. It was, okay, you're going to be a spokesperson now. And he said, you know, it's really hard for me because I feel like I should be there. I want to be there. I think it goes back to the guilt that you were talking about. I want to be there, you know. So just the mindset of all these firefighters. And then fire station number 69 is the one that was in the Palisades. And all around the fire station completely burnt down, but theirs was standing.
The station itself?
Yes, station 69, which is in the Palisades. And I just kept thinking about these poor men. I saw them one evening, you know, just said hello, and I could tell they didn't want to talk to me then. Of course, we were respectful and just sort of stood back, but I saw them, and they're like, we're just done. I mean, those were some of the words. We're just done. We get a little break right now, but we're going back out.
Yeah, what were their shifts like during that time? Were they doing a 24 on, 24 off kind of deal, or 48 off, or
by the time we were there, I don't know what it was like early on, but they were saying 24 out fighting the fires, whatever, you know, they may be doing, but out there for 24 hours. And I said, they don't sleep. They said, well, they'll close their eyes maybe on the ground. Sometimes they lean up against a tree. And then even when they came back to home base, some were sleeping on the sand. In Pasadena, you know, some were being put in hotels, again, wherever they could just find sleep, right? To take a little break.
There were a lot of naps, just wherever they could squeeze one in. And, you know, they all tried to remain positive, because we were there when there was still no water coming out of the hydrants. And, you know, one of the homes that went up, I was like, you got any idea, like, why this home just went up now out of the blue? He's like, the fire, you know, just kind of like joking. He's like, oh, sorry. He's like, he's like, apologized. He's like, sorry, I didn't mean to be flippant, but, you know, I don't know. He's like, I've been out here for 24 hours, 36 hours. And he brought like a wrench or a tool over to the hydrant that was next to me and clanged it, just, you know, to see and if anything would drip out, but it was empty at that point too. So despite their frustrations, I would say the firefighters, I just, what they went through and their attitudes and their work ethic, and still to see how helpful they were to us. I was blown away by that. I really was. I was blown away.
And keep in mind, there's, I think, about 24 firefighters who lost their own homes. We've heard about that. I mean, they were out there busy fighting fires, and yet their home was taken up in flames, you know? So you hear those stories too, and you're just like, my goodness, they sacrifice so much. They really do. In this case, they sacrifice their own homes.
As their families are trying to find shelters and, you know, managing all of that. Jared, I'll ask you that same question that Tess answered. Is there a story, a person, a place, a smell that keeps coming back to you now that you're back? You've had some time to reflect on this.
Yeah, I mean, there's, like you said, Tess, I think you can always like picture all their faces, you know, the people who talk to you. There was one woman who actually is from Arizona, moved there. She's a senior, and she and her sister now live together in Altadena in an apartment. And they together lost everything, and she was telling me that, you know, they're both just basically on Social Security. You were saying earlier, I think a lot of us have the image of Southern California being very ritzy, you know, and everybody having a lot of money. That's definitely not the case.
No.
And these two senior women, sisters, live together in what she described as like a Golden Girls type situation, which sounds idyllic, but they're both on Social Security. They didn't have renter's insurance. They lost everything. And she was in one of the stores, like a Ralph's or a store that was helping get people their basic IDs, like a driver's license or government ID, so she could use that to go on to her next step. So just like the how overwhelmed she was at that point will stick with me, I think. Because when you're in that situation, you're a senior, you lost everything, you know, and it's just you and your sister sort of against the world at this point with nothing. That's just, I wonder what's to become of her. Where's she going to find a place to rent? I don't know.
That's one of my biggest concerns in seeing this and in covering it. We've talked about this off the air, was what happens to a lot of these folks who won't be able to rebuild their lives? You know, like, do they end up on the streets, right? I mean, they're in shelters right now, evacuation shelters. When does it become a homeless shelter because they can't get back on their feet? You know, it's fantastic that there's so many GoFundMes and so many ways that people are giving in. But what about those who don't have that? Like these probably two elderly sisters.
It's really hard to grasp, you know, not just the scope of all this, but the timeline. Yeah, like how long will they be able to stay in that shelter? When, if there is help coming, how long will that take to get there? You talked about the firefighters doing their job while this is going on around them and impacting their families. It's kind of the same story with local media in LA, and you talked to some of them, Tess.
Yeah, I have a few friends in local media in LA, and one was a sports photographer at one of the stations and obviously pulled to just cover the fires nonstop where they're going. I mean, Jared and I got to come home, Whitney got to come home right from covering the fires. But for them, this is going to be their story for not just weeks, but months, years to come, you know, and the impact of that. So I can't even just imagine the toll. And sadly, I learned just yesterday, one of my friends who was my first, I call him my first work husband because he was my first photographer that I worked with in Orange County and then in Santa Barbara. He lost his home. He literally, he was in the evacuation area, but he was like, it's so far, we're fine, telling his kids, you know, single dad, divorced. His name is Dennis. And Dennis said, I got to work, but I'm going to, you know, got everything what he could just to keep busy for the next few days so they'd have stuff. Went to work, and then days later, you know, he's doing his job as best he could, finds out that his home is gone.
Where was he?
In Altadena.
In Altadena, yeah.
Altadena area. So I'm going to share his GoFundMe because a friend just started one for him. And, you know, it's stories like that. You're just like, you know, but that's everybody. That's everybody. No one was expecting this.
The photographers you both were sent with, Kyle and Shane, photojournalists that are really good at their jobs. How are they doing? And can you share some of their experiences if you think they're okay with that?
I just ran into Kyle the other day. He seems fine. I mean, we were both, you know, emotional at different times while we were over there, just because I keep using the word overwhelmed because I don't know what else to say because I've never seen anything like this. I mean, I've been to different disaster scenes and stuff. I've never seen anything like this. And he covered, oh gosh, it's slipping my mind. It's not Katrina. It was the other horrible hurricane that hit Texas. Harvey, yes. And he was there for several days, I think, you know, sleeping in a truck. And he said that is the only thing that even comes close to what we saw in California last week. So, you know, we're okay. And, you know, it's just a lot. While you're working, your mind is focused on the work and like your next deadline. But then when you have little moments of downtime, or maybe when you go back to the hotel at night, that's when it starts to sink in a little bit, at least for us.
Absolutely. I think the same. I just saw Shane. So the crazy thing in all this, when I asked to go and our boss said, okay, you're going, you're leaving Monday. And I said, who am I going with? And she said, Shane. And I said, I've never met him because he works, you know, a different shift than I do. And our paths just have not crossed. I figured out who he was. I'm like, okay, I've seen him. And then texted and called him and talked to him. And, you know, I think we were both on the same page of what we wanted to capture days later was the people, right? And the loss, and where do we go from here, the emotion. And there's so much of that, obviously. I just checked in with him just before we started this, and I said, can I share some of the things that we went through? And he said, absolutely. And I, you know, it sort of ties in the most impactful story you said, or the people. It's that family that we saw in the evacuation center. During that interview with this young girl, he had to walk away for a second, and I realized just sobbing, you know, because it really hit him. And then at that point, we were all sobbing together with this family. But how could you not?
Right.
Everybody is human. That's what gives us the strength to be able to tell those stories, to be able to share those stories, because you can relate to them. I know, sorry.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is. And you have those moments.
Yeah. Do you think, and maybe with this question, how do you think this may have changed you as a journalist?
Gosh, I mean, this really puts things in perspective. I feel like we see a lot of bad. I mean, this really puts things in perspective, and it makes me think, gosh, I have nothing to complain about in my world, and maybe some of our viewers took that away as well, seeing everything that not just a family, but neighborhood after neighborhood is going through over there. And to see how they're just like us, they're not all rich and famous people in mansions, like they're just normal families like us. Maybe that's a viewer takeaway as well, to sort of put things in perspective. And our challenges, everybody's got their challenges, but man, these people are going through it. And it's not, as you said off the top, it's not just their home, it's their barber shops they've gone to, their local restaurants, local businesses, the banks that went up in flames as well. I mean, a bank is kind of an impersonal thing, but everything burned. Like, they don't have like the basics to return to. So for me, it just put things in perspective as to what really matters.
I think same. I think, I was looking at, the sheer number of square miles that's been burned. Forget that it's now over 15,000 homes and structures, and that number keeps growing, excuse me. But I think they're putting it now to somewhere around 63,000 square miles. And I was like, how much is that? And I was doing some research. The city of Chandler is 65 square miles. So imagine one whole city. Glendale is about 55 square miles. So more than just the entire town of the valley, a certain town that we know here, completely gone, and everything in it completely gone. That's a lot. That is a lot to take in. And I think, if anything, we learn to just be appreciative. Like you said, it's hard to not come out of this and just be like, we're lucky. We're lucky. It's the little things, that make the difference, and the people that make the difference.
I kept thinking, in some of the homes, like, it was remarkable to see what burned and then the little things that didn't burn. And I keep thinking, God, I hope these families get to go back there and get these little things. Like, one family still had, I don't know, like, for graduations, you'll get a yard sign to say, like, home of the graduate, 2024, blah, blah, blah. They had, the house is gone, but the little yard sign was still there. And I'm like, I hope they get back before a gust of wind takes this away. And some rose bushes survived, and little plants would survive here and there. So, and like a family's wind chimes were in the tree was gone, but the wind chimes were there. And I hope that they're able to go home and get those tiny mementos to bring with them as they rebuild or move or whatever their plan may be.
Well, I know it wasn't easy. Thank you both for sharing your experiences with us today. It's unfathomable what they're going through, and to see this kind of destruction, and, thank you for your perspective and for sharing today. We do want to leave people with some hope and some ways to help. We have a lot of content on azfamily.com. Home insurance strategies, what happens if you ever get dropped, how to avoid getting dropped, how to shop for a new policy, important document storage plans, how you should store everything digitally and fireproof safe, iCloud concerns, protecting your home from fire dangers no matter where you live, mental health issues and dealing with tragedies and navigating emotions. We could spend hours highlighting individuals and GoFundMe's, but if you want to give, we do have some ways to do that also safely on azfamily.com as well. Thanks so much for joining us.